Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into borderline personality disorder, understanding it, managing it, and your guide is right there with you. The Borderline Personality Disorder Workbook by Dr. Daniel J. Fox.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, our plan is to really pull out the core ideas, the practical tools right from those first chapters of your workbook.
Yep.
The aim is to give you a clearer picture, sure, but also, maybe more importantly, some solid ground, some strategies for navigating BPD.
You know, I was struck by what Dr. Sherry Cormier said about it. She called it user-friendly, pragmatic, and positive. That positive angle feels, well, really necessary for this topic. What's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely crucial. The introduction, and you hear this from Dr. Lane Penderson too, it stresses right away that yes, BPD is challenging, no doubt.
Right.
But it is treatable. That's the key message. It's not about being stuck. There's a real path towards making things better, reducing its hold on your life.
And the workbook makes it clear, doesn't it, especially the Betty story right at the start, that this isn't some one-size-fits-all thing. Her experience feels very hers.
Precisely. BPD shows up differently for everyone. So today, we're building on that foundation. We'll look at how the workbook helps you identify it. We'll explore where it might come from.
Attachment styles too, right?
Attachment styles, yep, the subtypes it mentions, and then really drilling down into your own individual symptoms. So maybe let's start with BPD 101, just the basics.
That sounds good. So the DSM-5, the official manual, basically describes BPD as this ongoing pattern. Instability is the key word in relationships, self-image, emotions.
And impulsivity.
And impulsivity, right? Marked impulsivity, usually showing up by early adulthood.
And within that, there are those 9 specific criteria. The workbook uses Betty's experiences to make these like really concrete.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Like her reaction when her boyfriend didn't text back immediately, that huge fear. That's a textbook example of frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, real or, just feared. It often comes from this deep fear of being worthless if you're not connected, which is a core wound you see a lot.
Right, and her relationships. Putting Steven on a pedestal, then suddenly he's terrible after, like one small thing.
That's the unstable relationships criterion. That swing from idealization to devaluation. Very characteristic.
Then there's the identity disturbance. Betty changing her views, her values, depending on who she's with. Like a chameleon.
Yeah, it speaks to that shaky sense of self, doesn't it? Trying to fit in, avoid rejection, because that core, who am I, just feels wobbly.
And the impulsivity, her reckless driving, the DWIs, shoplifting because she was bored, those are pretty clear examples of self-damaging impulsive acts.
And sadly, her cutting after the breakup, that points directly to the criterion about recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, threats, or self-harm. It's a stark reminder of just how intense the emotional pain can be.
Her crying spells, the constant online searching for someone new, that really shows the effect of instability. Moods just swinging wildly based on what's happening.
And that feeling Betty described, alone in a crowded room, that really nails the chronic feelings of emptiness many people with BPD talk about, like something's missing inside.
We also see the intense anger, her arguments, getting into physical fights. It's not just being irritable, it's often this overwhelming rage that's hard to control.
Definitely. And finally, feeling detached, like a puppet during stress. That touches on transient paranoia or severe dissociation, sort of checking out from reality when things get too intense.
So the DSM-5 says you need 5 or more of these 9 for a diagnosis.
Right, 5 out of 9. But, and this is really important, the workbook stresses that even if you only connect with, say, 2 or 3 of these, those traits can still cause real problems, and there are definitely things you can work on using the strategies in the book. It's not all or nothing.
That makes sense. It also mentions a BPD spectrum, from mild to extreme.
Exactly. It encourages you to think about the intensity of your symptoms. Where might you fall on that spectrum? It's just another layer of self-understanding.
And it puts it in context, too, about 6% of U.S. adults diagnosed, and it affects men and women pretty much equally. That surprised me, actually.
Yeah, the old idea that it was mostly women is, well, outdated. So you're definitely not alone in this. Understanding these criteria is kind of step 1.
Okay, so that's the what. What about the why? Where does BPD come from? That's a huge question.
It is, and the workbook is clear. There's no single answer. It's usually a mix of things. Genetics, your psychological and social environment, and even how your brain functions.
Let's start with genetics, then.
Okay. So research suggests a pretty significant genetic link, maybe somewhere between like 37% and 69% of diagnoses have some genetic tie-in. If you have a close relative with BPD, your chances are higher.
But it's not like inheriting eye color, is it?
No, not exactly. It's more like inheriting a predisposition. Maybe you inherit traits like impulsivity or high emotional sensitivity, anxiousness, and then certain life experiences might sort of activate those traits into BPD. Think of it like genetics loads the gun, but environment often pulls the trigger. Knowing about a potential genetic link helps with awareness, but it doesn't seal your fate.
Got it. So what about those environmental factors, the psychological and social influences?
This is where difficult childhood experiences often come into play. The workbook points to high rates of abuse, sexual abuse especially, but also neglect, general adversity, maybe caregivers with substance abuse issues.
Chaotic family life, disrupted attachments.
All of those, yes. Things that make a child feel unsafe, unseen, or abandoned. Now, it's really vital to say, like the workbook does, not everyone with trauma develops BPD.
And not everyone with BPD had major trauma.
Exactly. But there's a strong correlation, especially the severity of abuse and when it happened seems linked to developing BPD later on.
The workbook mentions Lorna Smith Benjamin's sequence.
Ah, yes, that's a really insightful model. It paints a picture, starting with maybe a chaotic home, abuse, or abandonment leading to isolation.
Okay.
Then the child tries to separate or become their own person, but they're kind of seen as a traitor, a defector from the family system. And maybe the only time they get consistent care or attention is when they're really struggling, when they seem sick enough. So unfortunately, they might learn that distress is the way to get connection.
Wow, that really illustrates how those early dynamics can set the stage.
It does. And then there's the brain functioning piece. Research shows some differences in brain areas involved in impulse control, aggression, recognizing others' emotions.
Like the amygdala, prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. Areas involved in emotional response and regulation, they might function a bit differently, but, and this is hopeful, it's not fixed. Our brains are plastic. As you learn new coping skills, change behaviors, you can actually influence your brain function over time. It's a two-way street between experience and biology.
That's really important to hear. It's not just about blame. It's about understanding the complexity.
Precisely. Understanding the roots can be empowering, which leads nicely into another key piece, attachment.
Right, that basic human need to connect. The workbook says our attachment style starts forming really early based on how our caregivers respond to us.
Yeah, Bowlby's work is foundational here. Secure attachment that comes from caregivers being reliably there, attentive, making you feel safe.
So you learn to trust people, see yourself as valuable.
Exactly. Leads to healthier relationships down the line. But then there's insecure attachment.
Which comes from inconsistent care, neglect, maybe frightening experiences.
And the workbook uses Tony's story here, his mom being so negative, rejecting, even when he tried to share good news.
Yeah, dismissing his good grades, his baseball, that must have been so damaging.
Totally. It fostered this deep sense of unworthiness, and the workbook highlights that insecure attachment is, unfortunately, pretty common in BPD. It can feed into anxiety, anger, depression, low self-esteem in relationships.
It breaks down insecure attachment into 3 types.
Yes. Preoccupied, where you desperately want closeness, but constantly fear rejection. Dismissing, where you kind of downplay emotions and relationships, act really independent and fearful.
Fearful is wanting closeness but being terrified of it. Feeling unworthy or expecting to get hurt.
Spot on. And the workbook suggests people with BPD often land in the preoccupied or fearful categories. You see that push-pull dynamic a lot.
Wanting connection but pushing it away out of fear.
Exactly. That fear of abandonment clashing with feeling unworthy. Tony wanting Pam but expecting rejection really shows that conflict.
But again, there's hope. Attachment styles aren't set in stone.
No, definitely not. That's a key message. With conscious effort, learning new skills, challenging those old negative beliefs about yourself.
Like using self-soothing techniques.
Yes, managing the anxiety.
Yeah.
You can actually shift towards more secure ways of relating. Recognizing your style is a huge first step.
Okay, so understanding attachment is key. Now, what about these subtypes of BPD? The workbook mentions 4.
That's right. Based on Millen's work, discouraged, impulsive, petulant, and self-destructive. They're like different flavors almost.
Okay, break those down a bit. Discouraged.
Discouraged often involves trouble making decisions, needing others around, kind of holding anger inside until they feel pushed, then maybe acting out indirectly, often feel quite helpless.
Impulsive.
Impulsive can seem flirtatious, maybe a bit superficial, high energy, but loses interest fast, acts without thinking, unpredictable, often seeking stimulation.
Petulant. Sounds grumpy.
Yeah, kind of. Quick to get annoyed, impatient, easily frustrated, sees the world negatively, maybe resists expectations. Also unpredictable.
And self-destructive.
Difficulty deciding, self-worth goes up and down, can be humbled and suddenly inflexible. Impulsive acts often involve self-harm, very negative self-view, almost punishing themselves.
The workbook has an assessment for this.
It does, yeah. A BPD subtype assessment.
Yeah.
Helps you see which descriptions resonate most, and you might identify with more than one. They're not rigid boxes.
But it gives you another angle to understand your specific patterns.
Exactly. More insight into how your BPD tends to show up. Which leads us to the next logical step, looking closely at your individual symptoms.
This seems really practical. Instead of just, I have BPD, looking at the specific pieces, like Betty did.
Right. It makes it feel less overwhelming, more manageable. The workbook has the symptom expression rating form. Simple 0 to 10 scale.
And you use that to see which symptoms have been most intense for you lately, like the past 2 weeks.
Yep. You identify your primary symptoms, the ones you consistently rate 7 or higher.
And the list covers a lot. Being highly reactive, intense relationships, lacking empathy sometimes, quick intimacy, easily influenced, emptiness, intense anger, paranoia under stress, self-harm. It's quite comprehensive.
It really is. It covers a wide range of thoughts, feelings, behaviors associated with BPD and related patterns. Seeing Betty's primary symptoms listed there can also be validating, normalizing.
And this section also talks about prognosis, what the outlook is like. That's often a big worry.
Understandably. And the workbook offers some genuinely hopeful statistics here.
Like what?
Well, first, most people stick with treatment about 88%. That's huge. It shows commitment to getting better.
Okay.
And recovery, meaning significant symptom reduction and better functioning, is absolutely achievable. Studies suggest around 50% reach recovery over time.
50%. That's significant.
It really is. It powerfully counters the old idea that BPD was this permanent, unchangeable thing. It's not. You can actively work towards recovery.
So wrapping up this first part of our deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. The diagnostic criteria, the potential origins, genetics, environment, brain function.
The impact of attachment styles, those 4 subtypes, and the importance of zeroing in on your specific primary symptoms.
And the main takeaway woven through all of this seems to be hope and treatability. Just engaging with this workbook is a massive positive step.
Absolutely. It really is. So we really encourage you to just sit with this information for a bit, reflect on what resonated, what felt familiar in your own experience.
Because understanding these foundational pieces, the what and the why and the how it shows up for me, that's really the groundwork for using the tools and strategies coming up later in the workbook.
Couldn't agree more. It sets the stage for change.
So as you think about all this, maybe mull over this question. Considering everything we've touched on today, the complexity, the different factors, what single aspect feels like the most compelling place for you to start focusing your energy for personal growth and change?